The 2025 G20 summit in Johannesburg was historic as the first G20 hosted in Africa, highlighting the continent's growing influence. Focusing on Africa's development and global inclusion, the summit addressed issues like climate resilience, debt, and digital progress. Similarly, African and global leaders and organizations have used the platform to promote collective interests. In today's roundup, we'll reflect on the takeaway of the G20 summit and the role of principal summits in shaping influence and competition in Africa as well. Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Gamachisa Mandida, joined by Barakat Sisai, who has been in Johannesburg attending the G20 summit recently. Stay with us. Hello, Barakat.
Hello, Gamach.
Yeah, lucky you that you've been in South Africa, Johannesburg specifically, to attend the G20 summit. And I believe that you've observed a lot of interesting things there, happenings in relation to the G20 summit. Well, I just would like to begin with asking you how this 2025 G20 summit in Johannesburg, which is, of course, which shows Africa's increasing influence, how did it take place? What happened really exactly there?
Thank you very much, Gamachis, for the chance. As you have mentioned in the introduction, you mentioned that I were in Johannesburg for covering and giving a report on the historic G20 summit. As we all know that this G summit was actually held on the African soil for the first time, and then it was very historic, and then it was actually a pride moment for Africa, not only for Africa, but also the global south in general, and it was held under the big banner of solidarity, equality, and sustainability, which this theme is very much resonant with the priorities and the demands of the global south and Africa in general. And this G20 summit, the 2025 G20 summit, was successfully held in Johannesburg, South Africa, and it was actually my honor and a privilege for me to represent my institution, the Pulse of Africa, and to give some live updates on the summits. And I had a chance to speak with so many experts who are working on the politics at the same time the economic spectrum, and most of the African experts, they told me that they are very much satisfied with what South Africa has achieved over the year since 2024. Back in December, South Africa took the presidency, and South Africa has prioritized some issues that South Africa promised to deliver over the tenureship, and most of these experts have expressed that they have been very much satisfied with the deliberation, which is actually given out by the South African government. And as you know, that there has been a lot of hype around this G20 summit when US President Donald Trump was saying that he will not send the US delegation to the South African G20 summit, and some of the other leaders, specifically the Chinese President Xi Jinping wasn't actually attending, and the Russian government as well. And there has been a lot of back and forth on this issue of who's going to attend and who's not going to be attend. But despite the fact that there has been a lot of just rumors about what will happen in Johannesburg if United States will not be on the table, something like this one. But South Africa successfully deliberated this G20 summit, one of the biggest event in recent time. And this G20 summit, as we know, that it was not actually an event. As we all know that when it comes to the perception about Africa is negative, this is one of the main reasons why the Pulse of Africa by itself, as a media institution established, there is a negative perception that Africa can't do something that the rest of the world is actually doing. So this event actually demonstrates the African agency that the African countries can do something great things like hosting such a kind of great event. And thanks for the South African government, it actually shows the capacity of the African countries, the capacity of the continent of Africa at large, because the summit demonstrates or showcases that Africa can lead, Africa can make a difference at the global level as well. Most of the times we perceived as we put on the corner of the problem. We are not actually part of the solution, or we're not perceived to be the major solution provider in this world crisis. Most of the times we always put on the receiving end of this challenge and these problems. But now I think Africa as a continent, we are actually stepping up to be, actually positioning ourselves as a true global actor in terms of just making a solution, in terms of finding a solution. And this G20, this G20, which was held under the South African presidency, actually tells us that Africa is actually just making a progress in terms of just become one of the most important factor in the global political economic realms.
By the way, this summit, has unique features. From the very beginning, we can see that, it takes place, for the first time in the African continent, and of course, specifically in South Africa. And what does it mean that, we are having, or we had, this summit in African soil? And of course, during this summit, what has been emphasized is that promotion of inclusive global governance and addressing the development priorities of the global South. And as you said earlier, of course, two global leaders, key global leaders, were absent. Yeah, President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping, and it means a lot when we think of this G20 having these presidents absent. It does mean a lot of things, especially in terms of its symbol and its implication as well. What do you say on this?
As I have said, for example, if you look at before the beginning of the G20 summit in Johannesburg, the international media was actually saying a lot about the absence of the U.S. president, specifically Donald Trump. And of course, the Chinese President Xi Jinping also expected to attend, but he also missed that opportunity. But he was also represented by the Prime Minister. But South Africa, despite the fact that these two big presidents, big names, were not on the table, South Africa successfully delivered. Even traditional, as we know, that the declaration was actually approved at the end of the G20 summit previously, as we all know. But in this G20 summit, the declaration was declared or approved by the G20 leaders at the beginning of the summit, which also one of the major achievements of South Africa. And South African President Ramaphosa was saying that this G20 summit actually it's a trump of multilateralism, because people were saying that the coming of Donald Trump's people they have some sort of criticism on the administration of Donald Trump, because they're saying that he is go against the main principle of multilateralism. He is actually working to weaken the collaboration among countries. There has been a lot of push on the South African government. Despite all these things, the South African government has been able to hold this big summit. And even though the absence of the U.S. delegation, it's actually something that it's a glaring impact. But despite the fact that South Africa, without having any problem, can deliver this big summit, Gamisa.
Yes, Barakat. The other thing is, of course, outside formal negotiations, civil society organizations and activist groups, voiced concerns on issues like corporate accountability, gender equality, and climate justice. This was voiced during this summit. And this is also, just one of the unique features of this specific summit. African countries from different parts of Africa have sent their leaders to attend this summit, and during, of course, the summit, the leaders managed to have meetings, discussions with respective leaders of the G20 countries, and of course that was something worth appreciating, especially when we think of opportunity for the African continent, because the African continent previously was or has been, very far away from the discourses of the G20 countries or the G20 nations, because there is big discrepancy economically, politically, in almost every aspect. Despite that, of course, this G20 summit that took place in South Africa has allowed African leaders to converge, to have discussions on what will benefit their respective countries and the whole continent. So implications for Africa and the global South in general is that this summit provided Africa with a unique platform to highlight its development priorities, resource potential, and innovative capacity. And even some people mocked it, saying G100, because more countries were present and were represented by their leaders, and a series of separate discussions took place alongside the G20 summit in Johannesburg, and that would give these countries opportunities to see what they can harness in that summit, which is a very good thing for African countries. And climate change, debt management, and digital transformation were topics that were emphasized during this summit. And what do you think has come out from the summit with regard to these topics?
But just from the outset, when South Africa took the presidency back in 2024, in December, South Africa's government has outlined 4 priority areas to work on over the tenureship. The first one was the inclusive government, and the second one is debt sustainability for low-income countries, and the third one is the climate action or climate finance, and the fourth one is the food and health security. So this 4 issue was actually from the outset resonate with the priority of the global South, at the same time the African countries. And if you look at, for example, from the first priorities, the inclusive development issue. For example, if you look at the recent report by the G20, which was commissioned by the South African government, at the same time the Nobel Prize winning economist, Joseph Stiglitz, they set out some sort of realities on this globe, and the report showcases the stark difference between and among countries, at the same time within the countries as well, when it comes to the inequalities. The inequality, specifically for the past 2 decades, has been widening. And this world acclaimed economists call upon the world leaders to do something about it swiftly. And South Africa, throughout its tenureship, has been staging a lot of summits, a lot of conference, and just bringing about, solution to this. One of the major challenge in our world. And the South African government also work with other leaders out of the G20 as well, just to do something very practical things to this major challenge of our time. And the second one is the debt sustainability issue. As we know that many African countries frequently face debt distress, specifically the low-income countries. And this is what the major challenge when it comes to this debt problem is, because of the cost of borrowing is very high. And when we talk about the cost of borrowing, I think this is somehow related with the International Credit Rating Agency practice as well. Whenever they measure the credit capacity of the African countries, the methodology that they have been applying is not actually at par with the interests and the demands of the African countries. And most of the African country has been calling for the reform of these credit rating agencies, because the methodology is not actually taking into consideration the reality on the ground. And as we know that, the lenders usually took the negative perception about Africa. Whenever they think about Africa or the global South, they think risk, because of this, negative output by the credit rating agency. And the African country has been calling out for the change of these methodologies, and the existing methodology should take into consideration the realities of the African countries. This is the second thing, and South Africa has been echoing the voice of the African countries to reform this credit rating agency. At the same time, the other international financial institutions, because the modalities or the frameworks that they have been putting together is not actually at par with what the African countries are actually looking for. So the third one is they have been working on the food and health security. As we remember, when 2019, when the COVID-19 broke out, that pandemic tested the capacity of the World Health System. And I would say that the World Health System was actually failing during that time, because it resulted the days of so many people, because the resilient capacity of the World Health System was not ready to respond to such a kind of crisis. And South African's government throughout its tenureship has been calling for the world leaders to respond to such a kind of crisis, because we have to ready for such a kind of crisis in the future. For example, the World Health Organization has been saying that in the future there might be some calamity, health crisis in the future. So countries should prepare in advance to respond to such a kind of crisis, just to avoid the calamity that we have faced back in 2019. And South Africa has been just doing something great in that regard as well during its tenureship. And the last one is the climate action or the climate finance as well. As we know that Africa as well is on the receiving end of the climate change or the climate change calamity adversity. As we know that African countries in general has been contributing less than 4% of the global greenhouse emission, but we are adversely affected by the climate calamity or adversity. And this is, I think, one of the elephants in the house issue for Africans, and African countries being calling for specifically the developed country, because they are responsible for the emission of the global greenhouse emission. So they have to do something. Specifically, for example, if you look at the 2009, the pledge by the Global North to the developing country, I think they pledged to give around $100 billion per annum starting from 2020. But that promise hasn't been delivered so far, and there has been a lot of problems with regard to that one. I'm not going to detail about it, but still the climate financing, which is coming to Africa, which is go to the global south in general, is not enough to it's not commensurate with the realities on the ground.
Yes.
So South Africa has been calling for the enhancement of both the quality and the quantity of the climate financing for the African countries specifically, and the global south in general. So all in all, when you look at the G20 summit in Johannesburg, as you have said, it's very much par with the interest and the demands of Africa, at the same time the global south. That's why many African countries have been attending.
The summit produced a comprehensive leaders declaration.
Yep.
And as you said earlier, Africa is a continent with important things, for example, minerals. These are raw materials. Of course, these raw materials are usually or have been exported to these advanced G20 member countries, and they would utilize them, they would add value to them, and then they send back to Africa. And we buy them, just with a lot of expense. We spend, dollars, to buy what they have produced, when they already have used, our raw materials, Africa's raw materials. And so the leaders' declaration in this summit involved inclusive industrialization, for example. Africa is sick of sending, its raw materials to the outside, and then these rich nations, they are advanced that they manage, to value add to these raw materials, and then they send back to us, and then we spend a lot, and this should stop. Africans need industrialization, and it has to be, of course, inclusive to African nations, and digital cooperation, supporting digital infrastructure, AI governance, and harnessing digital transformation for inclusive growth has been, of course, one focus area of this summit. And global governance reform, calling for reforms in the United Nations Security Council and other multilateral institutions, and this is necessary because the 21st century is a reality, has a reality that calls for Africa just to be part of the Security Council, and Africa cannot afford to remain as feeble, as lagging behind as it has been so far. So these were, of course, the takeaway from this summit, and they are very important. Well, Barakat, I just would like to take you to the role of principal summits in shaping influence and competition in Africa. Well, we remember in this 2025 G20 summit, African countries, either individually or collectively, have made, collaborations, agreements, okay, with the G20 member states, member countries, and of course, most of them, appear to be very important for both sides, but still they have challenges, they have problems. For instance, if we take, the China-Africa cooperation, which began, in 2006 with the title 2006 Beijing Summit, China has been interacting with African countries, and of course, it has been dealing with extracting minerals and investing in infrastructure, etc. That really allowed, many African countries, to ensure advanced infrastructure development in their respective countries, which is a very good thing. But unfortunately, there are limitations to this kind of arrangement, and there are many other kinds of, summits that establish, some kind of relations with African countries. For example, US-Africa Leaders Summit. These summits, of course, introduce agreements to the US and to respective African countries to engage in development projects, etc., which are helpful for African countries, but still they have limitations. And we have, EU-AU summits, just that engage respective countries both in Africa and in Europe to engage in development projects. And they are said to be, benefiting African countries. But when we go through, we realize that, that's not the case 100%. And there are challenges. And can you add to this, please?
I mean, as you have said, nowadays many African countries has been engaging with so many like countries outside of the continent, because I mean the world that we are in actually forced us to have some sort of partnership with the other countries, because we are living in a world where we are actually very much connected,
yes,
and interconnected as well. And what I have, maybe you don't have. So the only way that we can have everything is through partnerships, through collaboration. So within this frameworks, when you look at the African countries' partnership with the other countries outside of the continent, you would understand one thing, that is inequality or an asymmetric kind of partnership with the other countries.
Yes.
This is because Africa in particular has some sort of structural challenge, which is actually coming out of the colonial legacies. Many African countries, we have like humble backgrounds, and many of the African countries have been going through, it's the abject poverties and many kind of challenge, which is actually coming from in different kind of sources, like either in the politics, the social, and the economical aspect as well. So we're actually coming out of, a very complex kind of problems. And whenever we're trying to communicate or trying to collaborate with the other countries outside of the continent, we have that backlogs, we have that package, So in order to just to make some sort of correction on this collaboration or partnership that African countries has with other countries outside of the continent, we need to do 4 things based on my observation. The first one is, as you have said, many African countries are in debt distress, specifically in recent times, and even a few countries have been defaulted for a few years, back in like 2019, 20 something like this one. We have some report on that one as well. So in order to have an equal form of collaboration with these countries, the African country need to get out of this, this trap, or the debt trap. The debt trap is not actually coming from single countries. It comes from like the institution, at the same time from the sovereign as well, because the African country has been just getting some finances based on some sort of conditionalities, the first one. And the second one is the cost of borrowing is very high. which is very much related to the credit rating agency, because when they gauge, when they measure the African countries, they always associated with some sort of risk. So the risk premium is very high. So when one institution decides to lend some sort of financial package to one countries, they usually raise the interest rates, so that the African countries, because they don't have any option, they borrow that money. But when they're trying to get back that money to that lenders, they always suffers. And for example, if you look at some of the recent reports, the debt servicing of the African countries now reached to $160 billion per annum, which is a big money. Which is somehow beyond what the African countries actually invested on the education, the health, and something like this one. So in order to have some sort of collaboration with these countries, the African country need to get out of such a kind of trap, from debt trap. And the second one is when you look at the partnership that African countries has with countries outside of the continent, it's characterized as the paternalism. It's not based on equal terms. That countries might lecture you to do something and not to do that one, and the African country doesn't have the leisure or the freedom to do what they please to do. They don't have that the policy freedom, and this has to be corrected. The partnership, the collaboration that African countries has with the other countries need to be based on the principle of mutual benefit, the principle of the win-win manner or the win-win approach. Unless otherwise, African countries can never be beneficial from such a kind of relationship. And the third one is that I would like to mention here is, in order to correct such a kind of partnership with these countries, the African countries need to develop their capacities. When you come to on the African side, the African institutions are not strong enough to, make a good deal with these countries. The partnership usually are skewed toward the benefits of those countries outside of the continent, and mostly the African countries usually on the victim side. Just to correct that one, we need to have that institutional capacity, and the human resources that are working on that key institution need to be boosted as well. And the last one is the transparency. There has been a lot of conference, there has been a lot of partnership with these countries, but we don't have any transparency, at the same time accountability as well. There has been a lot of pledge. For example, if you look at the climate pledge, which is around $100 billion by this Global News in 2009, which hasn't been delivered yet. And no one is actually accountable for that one, because these countries has the moral responsibility. They don't have any legal responsibility to do that.
Yeah. These lofty declarations with limited follow-through, delays, unfulfilled promises, lack of accountability can diminish credibility. For example, during this G20 summit in Johannesburg, of course, declarations were made, okay? But who follows them? And who implements them? And who ensures that they are properly dealt with? This is a very important question that needs to be answered. Of course, usually there is power imbalance between African countries and other advanced countries, powerful countries, and they set agendas. Okay, these powerful countries, they set agendas, impose conditions, and prioritize strategic interests. And how should Africa just deal with this and risks of exploitation and resource dependency? Well, it is obvious that these advanced countries, most of them rely on the resources, the natural resources of African countries. And because, there is very limited technology amongst African nations, they are not able to harness, what they have, their resources. And so they depend on these advanced countries, to be able to utilize them, for example, to add value to them and be competent enough, to use the resources that they have. And still the challenge is so huge, and something real must be done by African countries.
Yeah, just to add on what you have said, when you look at the characteristics of this partnership, still it follows the footsteps of the last colonial footsteps.
Yeah, I
would say, because when you look at, for example, the partnership that these major economies, as with many African countries, they still depend on the resource extraction. For example, if you look at the economy of many African countries, which is very much vulnerable to the external shock, because the African economy is dependent on the commodities, the agricultural products. So there is a growing loud call from the African countries. We have to transit from the agriculture base to that of the industrial based one. When you look at the industrial base in Africa, which is very much narrow, when you compare with the agriculture one. So that there has been a call by the African countries to change these realities. And whenever these countries come to Africa, they have to think that they have to engage with the local communities, and they have to create a situation whereby the local communities can benefit from their engagement in that particular resource extraction process. Most of the times we have been just exporting raw materials to the outside world, and this has actually positioned Africa on the victim side. So this has to be changed once and for all. For that, African countries need to collaborate, and they have to just voice their concern whenever they get the chance to make that point on the high table.
Yeah, Barakat, African countries need to find effective tools, for sustaining growth and regional empowerment, and of course, making impact analysis of these summits. And they have to strategically pursue, autonomy by fostering inclusive partnerships with these nations or institutions in these nations. Barakat, I'm afraid time is up. We need to wrap it here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Viewers, thank you very much for watching our program. We do believe that you've gained some insights about the G20. Next time, we'll come up with a new edition. Until then, goodbye.